In this tutorial, we're going to take a detailed look at the options available for previewing your toolpaths once they've been created. The focus of this tutorial will be on the Preview Toolpaths form. So if I just open that up now by clicking this button in the Toolpaths tab, that opens up the form here, which still gives me access to my toolpath list. So the form appears in the top, and the toolpath list that I had at the beginning of the exercise is still down at the bottom here. Now, the key thing to say about the previewing process is that it is extremely accurate. It shows a very precise representation of the toolpath exactly as it will be output to your machine. And because of that, you can really rely on it to show you either problems before you go to your machine. So anything that you see in the preview that you don't like, you need to take action before it goes out to the machine, because it will be reproduced in the final machining output. The other area where the preview is very useful is if you have a problem with your final manufactured part, you can go back to your preview and see if the problem exists in the preview. And it is almost always the case that if the problem does not exist in the preview but does exist in your final part, then you can isolate the source of the issue to something that's occurring on your machine tool. And that's a really useful diagnostic as you're trying to pin down some problem that might be occurring between calculating and creating your toolpaths and cutting your final part. So the simulation is a really accurate view of what you're really going to get at the end of the process. Okay, so let's look at the form. The form is divided broadly into two areas. The first area here is dealing with the global options related to the simulation block and the preview material block here in the 3D view. And the second section here is dealing with the preview options for actually the process of running each of your toolpaths through the preview material. So we'll focus on the top initially. The first control we're going to look at on the Preview Toolpaths form is this drop-down box here, which determines the look of your material block through which we're going to preview the toolpaths. So when we open up this list by just simply clicking on it, we get an array of different material types. Now, these material types, they're organized broadly into stone, metals, wood, etc. And they are coming from a series of images which are stored on disk and installed as part of the software installation in the user data folder. And there's a separate tutorial you might want to look at which details the user data folder and includes details on how you can modify the images in this list or even add ones of your own. So you can simply choose different options from this list to suit the material that you're intending to actually cut your part in, and this will help you to visualize the finished result and might be useful later on if we save this preview image to send to a client for approval. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to focus on a special entry that always exists at the top of this list, which is Use Solid Color. And I'm going to select that, and this enables the little drop down box underneath, which allows me to pick a particular color for my material block. Now, it starts with a series of preset colors which you can just choose from that set, or alternatively, if you choose the More Colors button at the bottom of this dialog, that will open a much more sophisticated set of color options here, including this Custom tab, which allows you to move around any hue of color that you can pretty much imagine. So you can set the hue in this center box here, and then having chosen the hue, you can adjust the brightness of it. So you really can create any shade of color that you want. Now, the sign that we're going to cut is going to come on a dark black background, so I'm going to set black as our color, and this would also help us to highlight the material that we cut away with the toolpath previews. The next section on our form is the machined area color. Now, these three different options here determine how we will color the material block in the areas that have been machined. So by default, they will be no different. So if I now just run a simple toolpath from the bottom here very quickly, you'll see that it simply cuts into the material, and where it's cut into the material remains identical to the background material color. So we are simply cutting here into a solid piece of black material, and there's no difference in the areas that have been cut from the areas that have not been cut. But that's sometimes difficult to see where you've cut, and also if you've got some materials such as laminated materials where you can cut through one layer to reveal another, it's quite useful to be able to set the areas that you've cut to a different color from the main material background. And the first option here is a global fill color, and if I switch that on, we can now choose to have a different color for areas that have been machined from those that have not been machined. And that's in itself quite a useful aspect of your simulation process. In this case, all of our toolpaths will be colored the same. So if I'm going to just do the V-carve here, and as we carve into the material, the V-carving gets the same lime green color that I've selected because it's a global fill color for all machined areas on my design. However, I can also set the option to look at each toolpath and use a color that's been associated with the toolpath. And if we look down in our list here, you can see a little color swatch next to some of our toolpaths in the list, and this indicates that these toolpaths have had a color set for them and that color can be used uniquely for the toolpath. And the V-carving you can see here actually has a brown color associated with it. So if I select the toolpath color option here, we can now see that the V-bit toolpath has got its own unique color. The pocketing, which we did around the background, initially has no color set, and we can see that with the toolpath color radio button turned on here. I can click through my toolpaths in the list, and if you watch the color swatch here, you'll see that changes according to the toolpath that I've selected. Okay, so you get a feel for the different colors associated with each toolpath. The first pocket has nothing selected. It's a little bit difficult to see because the box that shows no fill is in fact grey on a grey background, but the grey box there means that this toolpath has got no color selected. It's much easier to see the fact that there's no color swatch in the list, so that's a much easier way to tell whether or not something has been set for this toolpath. So with the toolpath selected down there and the toolpath color option up here, I can now set to a particular color using the same color selector that we saw for the material block. And as I select white explicitly for my toolpath color here, the little white swatch appears to tell me that this toolpath now has a color associated with it, and every area that it cuts into the material block will actually be colored white. Okay, so that's the option I'm going to leave on for the purposes of the rest of this demo. The final two options to talk about on the top section of the Preview Toolpaths form are the Animate Preview and Draw Tool checkboxes, which are simply on or off. And they are setting whether or not we will see updated in the 3D view as the previewing process is underway. So as the tool is being moved through the preview block, do we actually see the process? And secondly, do we want to draw the tool geometry? And the tool geometry is drawn in wireframe so that you can see an end mill or a V-bit tool as it interacts with the material. Now both these options generally slow down the process of previewing if you just want to get to the end result, but they can help you to visualize both the flow and also the interaction of the tool with the material more clearly when you come to preview each toolpath. So it's entirely up to you whether you have these turned on or off. If you find that you just want to whiz through and see the end result of your previewing, then you can turn both these off and just look at the end result, and the whole thing will be a lot faster because it won't update the 3D view as it goes along. I'm going to leave them on for the purposes of this demo. Okay, so let's move on to the second section in the Preview Toolpaths form, which allows us to actually start to preview individual toolpaths. Now I'm going to start, before we go any further, by resetting the previews that we'd done earlier on. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually the button down here in the middle to reset the preview. And as your name suggests, that just removes any of the cuts that we'd made into our material block previously, and we're back to a fresh block now to run our previews through. So now back up to the top here, let's have a look at the first button. The first button is to preview a selected toolpath, and this is worth emphasizing what we mean by selection, because there are effectively checkboxes here which are to do with visibility of the toolpath, so whether or not a particular toolpath can be seen in its line view in the 3D view or indeed the 2D view, depending on where this option is set. But there's also a concept of a selected toolpath. So as I click once on each toolpath, it gets highlighted in blue with white lettering. If I click away from the form, it stays highlighted as bold, And there's only ever one of these. There's only ever one selected toolpath in your list at any one time, whereas you can have many visible toolpaths. But it's important to understand that you can have a selected toolpath that is not visible, and equally you can have a visible toolpath that is not selected. Okay, and the selected toolpath is going to work on the highlighted one that may or may not be visible. Okay, so you need to click it, the one that you're focused on in the list, and then that's the one that preview selected toolpath will act upon. Now the idea here is that we are focusing these tools, this first section of the previewing options here is about focusing in very much in detail on one toolpath. So the first thing we can do is simply click on it here and preview it. Okay, whether it's visible or not. And I'm previewing it at the moment with a speed set right down to the bottom, and you can see, because we have animate and draw tool, you can see the tool moving through the material and animating the whole process for us. When it's finished, it's set the material machined color to be white, which was the color we'd set for this particular tool. Okay, so let's reset that again and try this time. We can set the speed up. In fact, the speed can be set anywhere along this line, so we can now play it very fast and you'll see it occur extremely quickly. If I slow it down and we reset the preview, I can even adjust the speed as we go through dynamically. Okay, so that allows you to adjust so you can whiz through bits that you're disinterested in and slow the speed down for the areas that you are interested in. Okay, as well as that, we can pause at any time while we're previewing the toolpath with the play and pause buttons, just like on a video player. And you can think of this very much like a video playback system, where we can stop, play, and pause the toolpath at any point. Okay. Now then, I'm going to just stop there, and we are going to, so I've just played back a little bit of the toolpath and then stopped halfway through it, which is quite useful sometimes. But I'm going to reset the preview, and now what I want to do, I'm going to turn on the actual toolpath drawing in the 3D view so we can see the moves that the tool's going to make, and just highlight that this toolpath is broken up into several sections. So firstly, we come in here and we start to work our way out towards the boundary, but as we work our way out, some parts of the area that we're clearing are wider than others, and as we move out, we're going to leave little islands in the wider areas. And in fact, up here we need to break through and do a separate section. So essentially the toolpath has been calculated, and as it finds and creates islands, it has to come back and clean those up. And we get a retraction and a plunge move separating these aspects of the toolpath, which you can see here. Now it's quite useful to play back our toolpath in these sections. So we can play it back actually either a move at a time, which is what the single step option does, or we can play back entirely a section until it reaches the first retract. So in this case, we would expect it to machine its way out of here, but before it comes, it'll leave an island, and before it goes and does that island, we can actually stop at that point. So let's try that. So we've got the toolpath selected and visible now, but it's crucially is selected, and I'm going to play it back to the retract. And here we can see it machines its way out to the boundary, and at that point it's inevitably left a small island in the middle. It's going to have to retract, come back and finish off that bit of the island. And indeed, if we play it again, that's exactly what happens. And now we can finish off and play each section in turn. So this is a useful way for examining the toolpath. Again, the speed control has an effect here, so we can play it fast or slow according to that speed control. Okay, so that's really all the options here. So you can play the thing back, you can pause it at any time, you can play a single step, which is really very small increments indeed, so it's each single move of the tool. Probably more useful, you can play back to a retract, so you can see a toolpath that's in several sections with retracts and plunges between them. We can see them in isolation, and at any point we can abandon or stop at any point and see the finished result at an arbitrary position along the toolpath's progress. So that's previewing selected with speed controls. Okay, so having focused on a particular selected toolpath, so the single selected toolpath in the list, the next option we have here is to preview all the toolpaths, which hopefully is pretty self-explanatory. Regardless of the visibility state or the selection state of my toolpath list, I can just play back everything. Okay, and we can see the entire sign being created here with all the toolpaths. They're being run in the order that they appear in this list, and you can adjust the order that a particular toolpath appears in this list using these up and down arrows by selecting it and moving it up and down. Okay, so that's played back the entire toolpath set for us. Notice that it's coloured in nicely for us areas of the sign according to which tool cut them, so that's quite nice. But what I want to do now is I'm going to reset that again, and this time we're just going to pick some bits. So we might want to focus only on the V-bit carving and maybe the prism text. Okay, so the bits that we're using, for example, the V-bit tool for, and just pick those two out. And so by making them visible and then using the preview visible toolpaths, I can effectively pick any subset of the toolpaths in my list and simply preview those in isolation. So that's a really handy way of going as well. So that's pretty much allows you to focus on an individual toolpath using the preview selected toolpath. You can focus on a set of toolpaths by using the visibility checkboxes here and then running that preview visible toolpaths, or you can simply preview all the toolpaths in one go and look at the end result. Okay, so I'm going to reset the preview now. I'm going to preview all my toolpaths to see what the final sign is going to look a bit like. So it runs through that, as we've said before, in the sequence that they're in the list, and we end up with something that's coloured and cut out with the final profile cutout pass at the bottom here. And this now allows me, if I want to look at this sign as it will be in the finished result, I'd really like to get rid of this background material. And what I can do with any isolated areas that I've cut out, I can simply double click on them once I've previewed the toolpaths, and that will remove them. So if I double click anywhere on the external area of my material block here, it will remove the areas up to the cutout pass, and that allows me to throw away, just for the purposes of visualization, that waste material that would be part of the final design. And having done that, I can now set my view nicely, and I have the option here to save the preview image, which is a really nice way of creating a bitmap image or a PNG image perhaps for a website, or perhaps for customer approval before you go ahead and make the sign. The one thing I should say as well is, as you're deleting or removing bits of waste material, the option to undo the last operation is also highlighted here. So if you simulate a toolpath or you've thrown away a bit of material that was a mistake, you can undo the last operation with this control. So to give you a good clear view of that, instead of clicking the waste material here, I might accidentally double click on the sign itself, and the software is perfectly happy to throw that bit away and think that that's waste material as well, which is obviously wrong. But luckily I can simply undo that last operation and throw away the correct bit. So that's really the essence of previewing toolpaths. By the end of the preview process, you should be confident that your toolpaths are going to produce the surface finish that you're after and the shapes and geometry that you want. And you can also use the preview and colouring options here to produce a pretty lifelike final preview image, which you can use either for advertising or for customer approval or just for your own visualization.